Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." Over the years, I have heard this verse used to justify this callous dismissal of the needs of the poor. The idea that their needs aren't actually urgent because it's not like there will never be poor people. You can help them later, or you can help them less. It doesn't matter. Well, that has never sounded like something Jesus would have actually meant to me. Does it sound like it to you? Or do you struggle with this like I do, with how it would contradict everything else that Jesus said? Why did the writer of John write it this way? You even have the aside that the one person who brought up the poor was doing so out of hypocrisy to cover for his own crimes. Why does Jesus say this when it seems to contradict so much of the rest of his teachings? This didn't sound like what Jesus would have actually meant to the author Kurt Vonnegut either. Raise your hand if you know who that is. It's okay if you don't. I wasn't assigned any of his works when I was in school. I'm pretty sure my kids haven't either. But he was an American author from the 20th century, known for satire and dark humor. He was an atheist, although a self-proclaimed Christ-loving one, and he actually preached on this lesson once. And he found himself having a really hard time with it too, for the same reason I am. His solution to it was that he decided that something must have been lost in the translation. Vonnegut came to the conclusion that it was a joke, Jesus being snarky, calling out Judas's hypocrisy with the cover of civility. He translated it as, "Judas, don't worry about it. There will still be plenty of poor people left long after I'm gone." That's great. Thanks, Kurt Vonnegut. No less than we would expect from such a brilliant writer. We dealt with the difficulty of this lesson by blazing straight through it and bringing it back to where we would prefer to see it with just a tone change. I'm not anywhere near Vonnegut's league, and honestly, it's kind of tempting to tell you that we can leave it at his interpretation and sit down. But no. If Vonnegut had the audacity to question scripture like that, then maybe I can have the audacity to question his approach and try to find a connection between this and the rest of Jesus' teachings. Because to be honest, I think that being sarcastic in a moment like that is out of character for Jesus too. So let's go back and look at it again. Jesus and the disciples have gone to the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus and had dinner. Lazarus has been raised from the dead in the previous chapter, so they've got the enormity of that hanging over them, the grief that became joy again. And then Mary takes the nard, anoints Jesus' feet, and wipes them with her hair. The fragrance is so overwhelming that it fills the house. So picture the situation. Dinner with someone Jesus brought back from the dead, whose sister has now gotten down on her hands and knees and wiped Jesus' feet with her hair. And she's vulnerable here. She's physically in a vulnerable position and in an emotionally vulnerable one as well. And that's when Judas just has to get his dig in. And I think about how Mary would have felt. She's just made this incredible, loving gesture to Jesus. She's lying on the floor. One of the disciples has the audacity to call her out to her face in front of everyone about how wrong and selfish she was to spend the money on something like that instead of helping the poor. I think she must have felt stunned and hurt. That makes me wonder if this was a habit of Judas's. Did he often try to cover up his thievery by accusing others of being wasteful with the money, or was it just this time? And then I wonder, too, if part of it stemmed from disapproval of Mary's presence in the first place. Because in that culture, at that time, a woman sitting with the men like that wasn't something that was done. Maybe Judas thought she should have been back in the kitchen with Martha, and this was his way of punishing her for not knowing her place. And this is why I can't go with Kurt Vonnegut's interpretation of Jesus' words as snarky. I think that sarcasm in that situation would have come across as dismissive of Mary's beautiful gesture. I picture her lying there, already hurt, the nard and dust from Jesus' feet still on her hair, and I don't see how that tone would have comforted her. And I also think it would have sounded so awkward to say something sincere And then something sarcastic back to back. Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. This wasn't how Jesus treated people, and it particularly wasn't how he treated women. Jesus was remarkable for his inclusion of women for his time, which is why Mary was sitting with them in the first place. So I think we have to dismiss this reading of the text, which brings us back to the problem of figuring out what Jesus meant when he said we would always have the poor with us. Here's a thought. What if Jesus was sad? It would seem to make sense. We're in the home of the man whose death caused Jesus to weep, even though he knew he would bring him back. Mary's gesture has to do with his own upcoming death, which he knows is coming soon. And now one of his friends is attacking and embarrassing another one, the one who has just performed a gesture out of the depths of her love for him, and it's being ruined and making her feel hurt. And he knows that Judas's problem isn't actually about the needs of the poor, but even worse, he's using the plight of poor people to attack Mary. Even further, he knows that if the 300 denarii had in fact been spent on the poor, and I looked this up because I was curious, and I saw estimates of the value of 300 denarii in that time being the equivalent of anywhere between $15,000 and $35,000 in today's money. So even if that had all gone to help the poor instead, it would not have solved the problem of poverty. Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. Jesus was right. We do still have the poor with us. Why? Like so many other problems in the world, it goes back to our flagrant misuse of God's incredible gift to us of free will. We choose greed over generosity. We pull up ladders behind us instead of helping more people climb up. We pretend that we can't follow the example of the earliest Christians who shared what they had and made sure that everyone was cared for. Instead, we've built a world where wealth inequality is so vast that a Pew survey from earlier this year found that across 36 countries, 84% of respondents reported that the gap between the rich and the poor was either a moderately big or very big problem in their country. Which makes sense because globally, the richest 10% earn over half of the income, while the poorest half earn only 8% of the income. And in our own country, I could give you stats for days. We have a wider gap between the rich and poor than any other major developed nation. The richest 1% own more than half of stocks and mutual funds, while they pay a smaller and smaller share of taxes. The top 12 American billionaires are worth $2 trillion, and $1.3 trillion of that is just since 2020, as opposed to the bottom 40% who are in a zone called negative wealth, where their debts are worth more than their assets. Over 11%, nearly 37 million Americans live below the poverty line, and many of the support structures that we have had in place to support the poor are being dismantled as I speak. There are divides across racial groups as well. White families make up 84% of the wealth in this country, despite comprising only 66% of households. Black and Hispanic families combine for only about 6% of the wealth. Black Americans are about 13% of the population, but nearly 24% of the population living in poverty. In the LGBTQ community, a full fifth of the population are living in poverty. The divide across generations in terms of wealth is pretty staggering too. Baby boomers own more than half of the country's wealth, whereas millennials, and I know a lot of people still think of millennials as college kids, but that's actually around the middle of Gen Z now. I'm an elder millennial myself. We're starting to hit our mid-40s. And we possess only 6.5% of the wealth. Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook alone owns 2% of all millennial wealth. Now, that's a huge disparity. I keep going to meetings and conferences where I hear about, it's okay that millennials and Gen Z don't have any wealth now because we're going to benefit from the largest transfer of wealth ever. But I don't know anyone in these generations who actually thinks that's going to happen. We know the wealth is going to go to healthcare and assisted living providers. So it will be very, very hard for the poor in these generations to ever find a chance to rise out of it. And this isn't partisan. These are just the numbers. Poverty comes from the hoarding of resources. Take famines. They're not caused by there being no food, but by not enough food being available to everyone. During the potato famine, the Irish starved in part because Ireland was forced by the British government to export food during a blight, which had already decreased the potato crop. Globally, God has blessed us with abundance, more than we need to care for everyone. Instead, you have wealth so concentrated that the world's richest man is openly attempting to buy elections and governments around the world, while 730 million people face hunger. So yes, the poor are always with us. Jesus telling us that didn't contradict anything that he said in terms of the need to care for them. The poor are always with us due to human actions, and so that's Jesus telling us that we always need to care for them. We made and continue to make this mess. It's up to us to follow Jesus' directions to try to clean it up as best we can. That's what's supposed to differentiate us as Christians, that we would rather clean it up than make it worse. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you what you personally should be doing about poverty. I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you are doing everything that you can. Maybe you are someone who is in need. Maybe I don't want to open up that can of worms because then I would have to start preaching it myself too. What I am going to do is talk about this parish as a Christian community and what we as a church can be doing. Because one thing that I love about St. Thomas's is that I think this is a parish where people are hungry to build a Christian community of service, but we get distracted from time to time. A little over a year ago, we held parish meetings where we talked about the things that we wanted the parish to start doing. There were anti-poverty ideas in there. We talked about big ideas, like getting involved with the affordable housing movement, maybe even finding a way to contribute some of our land and space to that. And we talked about smaller ideas, like buying laundry machines and making those available to people in need, along with being able to launder our own tablecloths and blankets. These were good ideas, but we didn't go anywhere with them. So I want to challenge the congregation and its leaders, and congratulations and thank you to the new members of our vestry. Come back to this. We have been waiting, but the time to act is now. We know, as Jesus told us, that we have the poor with us. Now we need to care for them. Their needs are urgent. It does matter. Amen.